Hey folks, Roland Martin here, host and managing editor of Roland Martin Unfiltered. This is a special edition in partnership with the National Association of Black Journalists called Not on Our Watch. Our focus is on press freedom. The recent arrest of journalist Don Lemon and Georgia Fort in Minneapolis by Donald Trump's Department of Justice has caused many folks to focus on the freedoms of press in the freedom of the press in this country. There has been lots of dialogue about this as we have witnessed these ICE arrests nationally, the protests taking place, and how this administration has frankly been targeting media, not just in the streets, but also in the White House. The attacks on media have been consistent. They have been all over the place. You've seen personal attacks hurled at journalists. This is probably one of the most aggressive administrations when it comes to its treatment of media we've seen since the Nixon administration. Joining me right now is Erin Haynes. She is the president of the National Association of Black Journalists. Of course, I'm also vice president digital on our board of directors. And this issue goes beyond Don Lemon and Georgia Fort. It really speaks to how media, how journalists in particular, independent journalists, mainstream media, black-owned media, but also how media institutions are seen, frankly, as the enemy by this administration. Erin?
Absolutely. And listen, Roland, I mean, we have been in the trenches together. I've known you since I first joined NABJ 25 years ago. And now I'm just so proud to serve with you and our entire board and to be able to represent our members who are doing the work of telling the American story each and every day. So I just want to, first of all, say to them that we see you and we support you and we stand with you. Listen, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this very important, very urgent conversation that we convened because journalists, particularly Black journalists, are facing escalating threats simply for doing our jobs. Arrests and intimidation and retaliation and criminalization of coverage are no longer theoretical risks. We're seeing this happen in real time. But what we know is that press freedom is not just a professional perk, it is democratic infrastructure. And when it is weakened, democracy itself is placed at risk. So tonight is really about understanding what we are seeing, why it matters, and what collective action looks like. Roland, so glad to be in conversation with you and with our guests. So let's go ahead and begin. We want to bring in Cherie R. Curry, who is co-president of NABJ Minnesota. Certainly seeing so much of what is happening on the ground, but also seeing what is happening with our Black journalists, with our members that are on the ground, confronting what we're seeing happening every single day. So Cherie, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for your leadership. Now, Georgia Fort is also a member of the NABJ Minnesota board. She is your vice president. Can you talk a little bit about Georgia Fort as a journalist? She is somebody that has come into national focus, but somebody that you have known and that the people of Minnesota have known for her journalism for quite some time.
Yes, thank you. I'll say Georgia is a powerhouse. That's just one way to sum her up. She is a multi-Emmy award winning journalist. I'm sorry, can you hear me okay? Okay, yeah, you can hear me. Okay, so thank you. And so she started the Center for Broadcast Journalism, a nonprofit. She started Power 104.7, a radio station. She started Black Press as an independent journalist. She spent time, working as a broadcast journalist at major outlets before coming back and becoming an independent journalist. And she really gets to know the community. And they, tip her off, on stories. She's there. She's living among the people and covering the stories.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear you talk about just from the perspective of NABJ Minnesota, how these arrests really are affecting Black journalists locally, professionally and personally. People who know Georgia, people who saw that Don was also arrested and in federal custody. What message is that sending locally?
Yes, and I'll say I'm going to expand it, right? Not just our Black journalists, but there are so many journalists of color who are covering this story. Some of them who have immigrant families. Some of our journalists are also, outside of being from the Hmong community and the Latino community, Hispanic community, but also we do have Somali American journalists here as well. who are members of our NABJ Minnesota site. And so it affects all of us very personally. So especially those who are seeing their neighbors, seeing their friends, seeing the parents of the schoolmates of their children being arrested and detained, but also just being, some of them being pepper sprayed. One of them was shot, in the foot. So this is very personal for everyone involved. But yet at the same time, you're there to do a job. These journalists are there to cover the story while also, we have our own emotions to keep in check while doing this. So how can you still show up and do your job and get at home? You have to decompress, and at the same time, you still have a family to take care of. So it is a lot. As everyone on this call knows when covering such stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm listening to you and I'm hearing that these journalists, so often they're covering a story that they're also living through and trying to process that. Makes me think about, kind of what kind of support these journalists on the ground need. What does that look like? What are they asking you for? How can they be supported?
Yes, some of the things that are being asked for are protective gear. Whether it's going to be goggles and gas masks, other items that that are needed if they're out there, if they're going to get pepper sprayed. Somebody was even talking about whether or not they should get a bulletproof vest, or something like that, were to happen after what we have seen happen with Renee Good and with Alex Preddy. So the concerns are very real. At the other end of it, we're also just seeing calls for food. They're out there on the front lines, and other chapters have been sending in pizzas, sending them door dashes, and so forth. So just being able to remember, your fellow journalists in that regard. So I think that's very kind of everyone who sends in just food, thinking of the journalists.
Yeah.
Sheree, let me ask you a question, Sheree. Give everybody watching a sense of what is happening on the ground. When ICE and these federal law enforcement officials went into Chicago, there were bullets that were fired at journalists. Other journalists talked about how they're being pushed around, how they're being treated. And so, give us a sense of what is life like there for journalists on the ground trying to do their jobs. How are they being treated by federal law enforcement?
We're seeing a mix of reactions. They're also being shoved back, as you see with some of the residents and citizens. Stay away. Keep your distance. And at the same time, you're seeing a little bit of friendly banter with a few of them, and some jokes being exchanged. So it is definitely a mix. But at the same time, I know that the fear is also real when people are out there covering the stories as well as
I asked this question on Friday, and I still haven't seen it. Has there been a GoFundMe or a legal defense fund or something along those lines set up for Georgia Fort? Because listen, this is gonna be, we don't know how long this legal battle is going to take, and it's going to take resources. Do you know if anything like that has been established?
Their funds are being accepted through her website, georgiafort.com. There's a support button there. So I believe it's georgiafort.com/support. There's also a young man named Jerome. I'm blanking right now. Robertson.
His video circulated a little bit earlier. Yeah. And folks in our control room, let me know when y'all have that video so we can play it. He's a young journalist who assisted Don, and he put out an Instagram video saying that he's now being targeted by the Department of Justice.
Right, he was arrested today, this morning. Bondi put it on her X page. He has a GoFundMe up as well, so we can search his name. We're going to put that on our nabjmn.org site also later today. So he is someone, as a younger journalist, who really needs some of that help also with legal assistance, but so does Georgia, and so many. I'm gonna say also some of these other journalists. We have so many independent journalists working on the ground here in Minneapolis, and we want to be able to kind of provide support for them in other ways as well. So we take a few donations through our nabjmn.org site as well to help some of the ones who aren't known, but definitely Jerome, Georgia, who are arrested and charged will have much larger legal funds.
And Aaron, the young man's name was Jerome Richardson.
Yeah.
So we're going to pull that video up in a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the legal resources certainly seem like a thing that needs to happen. Cherie, I also wonder, I mean, are you hearing from members who, so many people that I've heard from across the country, even outside of Minneapolis, are seeing this and they're saying, what happens next? What about me? Could I be someone that could be targeted in this way? These arrests, are you worried that this could have a chilling effect to the folks who are on the ground trying to tell the truth and report from these communities about what is actually happening?
We do feel that that is part of the intention, right? With the arrest of the independent journalists from Georgia Ford, Don Lemon, and others, as well as some of the activists who were, is to instill that fear. So yes, there is definitely that fear. There are, I won't name names, I won't name organizations, but there are other, like I say, other independent journalists out there who are doing this work. And I think that potential of that target of independent journalists who do not have the same resources behind them as those who work for media outlets, that's an added fear. You know, some of them may not have insurance that's going to protect their homes, protect their cars if they were to get into some kind of a legal battle. So yeah, it's very real.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that what I'm telling journalists is probably the same thing that you are, that journalism is not a crime and that the First Amendment is not optional. Roland, I'm going to come back to you.
Cherie, we appreciate you joining us on this critically important discussion. Thank you so very much, and certainly give our best to the folks at NABJ members who are in Minneapolis. Aaron, the point that she just made there really is critical that I don't think people really don't understand. As somebody who created my own media company and launched my show September 4th, 2018, a lot of people don't think about the legal aspect, don't think about when you get when all of a sudden someone files a lawsuit. They don't think about insurance. Listen, when you work for one of these major media companies, they have significant law firms, they have internal lawyers, they have external law firms, they have insurance for when they get sued. A lot of independent journalists, small journalists, Black-owned media, they don't have that. And so when you ask the question about it being a chilling effect, that is real because what this is going to do, this is going to give a lot of independent journalists pause when it comes to covering future protests. Hey, I might be targeted. And so folks don't think about it in those terms. And when we talk about legal, we're talking about, you know, $25, $50, $75, $100,000 or more to spend money on a legal fight. And listen, that's just not something that's in the budget for a lot of media, independent small media companies.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And as we are seeing media consolidation, we know that independent journalism is only growing, right? The number of freelancers that we are seeing, even in our membership, but across the country, and folks that are starting, independent media companies with that proliferating across the country. This is something that is going to have to become more of a concern in the climate that we unfortunately are now finding ourselves in.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Let's go ahead and bring in our next guest, Caroline. You can go and introduce her.
Absolutely. So now we are going to hear from Caroline Hendry, who is Executive Director of the Society of Professional Journalists. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. And also, thank you so much for standing with us. Caroline, the Society of Professional Journalists was among 40 plus press freedom organizations that stood with us when NABJ put out our statement in support of Don Lemon and Georgia Ford and of press freedom and democracy. So thank you for your leadership and thank you for your partnership.
Well, thank you for bringing us together tonight, and thank you for your leadership. We were honored to join the coalition that spoke out against the arrests of these journalists. SBJ condemned the arrests of Don Lemon and Georgia Ford because arresting journalists under civil rights conspiracy and interference statutes for covering a protest represents a very dangerous escalation with serious implications for journalists across the country, all journalists, whether they're independent or if they work for news organizations. Our concern is about the precedent that this sets. If proximity to a protest, advance awareness of a protest, or real-time reporting, live streaming something can be reframed as criminal conspiracy, that's very dangerous to our First Amendment rights and our press freedom.
Caroline, Caroline, what have you been hearing from your members who are out there working these stories, giving you real-time feedback of what they are experiencing, what they are dealing with in trying to cover these various protests and how they're being treated?
Well, we have heard from members urging us to speak out. I think the concern is that criminal law is not how we enforce journalism ethics, if that's the concern. And, we've heard, SPJ is known for the code of ethics. It's a really foundational text that is used in classrooms across the country and newsrooms across the country. And often people speak out and say, there's ethical issues here. Well, this is not how ethical debate should happen, right? Journalists, when they face arrest for news gathering, under theories that turn reporting into participation, that chills coverage of all protests. And that's what our members are worried about. They see that and they understand and feel threatened, to be honest. Our members are constantly having to cover protests, civil unrest. Immigration enforcement, as you know, is huge. So what was the focus of this? This was an anti-ICE demonstration, and that kind of protest is happening all over the country, and particularly, Minneapolis, St. Paul now are ground zero, but it's happened elsewhere and will continue to. And so our members across the country are involved in this kind of coverage, and they're very, very concerned that this chills coverage. We are very concerned as well that this has other implications, even, eroding trust in authorities, charged with upholding the law, and really deprives the public of firsthand on the ground reporting. That's what we're really concerned about, and what we hear from our members who were interested in us speaking out. Now, not everybody agrees with everything that happened there, and we have heard commentary about that from our members. But, we are not about adjudicating contested facts, disputed facts at this point. We are not about making some kind of statement of, perfect ethics. The test of press freedom is not about whether everybody did everything perfectly that everyone would agree with. That isn't what the test is all about. It's the principle that we're really here to defend, is that journalists should not be arrested for doing journalism.
Caroline, I asked the question earlier, a legal issue. Does SPJ know of, is there an entity that provides legal support for independent journalists, or is there a fund that you're aware of that independent journalists can, let's say, buy into, that operates as a collective that provides legal services?
Well, that's a great question. SPJ has a very modest legal defense fund that sometimes can provide some assistance, but and I think the idea of getting pro bono attorneys is really important. There is an organization called Lawyers for Reporters, I believe, and that's one that folks should look at. Of course, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press also has legal hotlines that I imagine that your journalists are aware of. If they're not, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, definitely look into that. They do provide pro bono assistance under certain circumstances. So that's another one to really look at. Yeah, those are the ones that spring to mind. The other thing, if you're out covering a protest and an emergency occurs, the Committee to Protect Journalists has a hotline that will connect journalists to resources in real time. If you send an email to emergencies@cpj.org, that's one that we also are aware of and encourage people to access. Yeah, it's just more and more of a problem. And you were saying earlier that often independent journalists might not think about this when they're going independent, about the need to have, it's one thing to have media liability insurance. It's another to prepare for criminal arrest.
Yeah.
Those are not the same thing, as you know. So we are entering, this is one of the big concerns about this, that we're entering what feels like a new era.
Yeah.
Well, and keep in mind, sorry, Aaron, keep in mind, Trevor Noah made a joke last night at the Grammys. Donald Trump is now threatening to sue him. This is what he's always done his whole career. And what people don't realize, you just can't ignore a lawsuit. So you actually have to fight it. You just can't say, well, this is no big deal. So even if somebody files a trivial lawsuit against you, you still have to defend it, and that's going to cost you some resources.
Yeah,
Aaron, go ahead.
absolutely. Absolutely. Caroline, we're talking about this legal piece. I'm wondering, though, if for people, even if they don't get, targeted, with a lawsuit or something, the chilling effect about, journalists even feeling like they can go out and do their job safely. What are you telling your members about how they can do that? And like you said, we know that ICE is only going to continue to be in communities across the country. We don't know what city, ICE could be headed to next, where journalists might find themselves, trying to cover ICE's presence in their city, or, protests that may arise as a result of that presence. How would you characterize the state of press freedom in this country right now, as we're thinking about how that might continue to play out in cities across America?
Well, I would say we're here tonight and we are standing up for press freedom. We joined together as a community really strongly last week. So I don't want to overstate the situation, that it's not as though there is no press freedom in America. There is. In fact, the public deserves press freedom. It is about the public's right to know. It's not just about journalists. It's about our whole society and our democracy. So I do think there is a very concerted effort to undermine legitimate, credible journalists and news organizations. It's been going on for many years now. It's multi-pronged. The kind of lawfare that you mentioned is very much part of it. It's trickled down from the highest levels to, communities across the country. So we are facing a great test as a journalism community and as a profession to stand up for ourselves. I've been saying from day one, we need to stick together and stick up for ourselves, and also make sure that we're explaining to the public that we are on their side, that we are trying to do our job and our members are doing their job to bring them the news and information that they need to function effectively as citizens in a democracy. So I would say that we're challenged. We are facing a concerted, multi-pronged campaign to undermine and delegitimize us, but we are not lying down. We are standing up.
That's right.
Caroline Hendry, Executive Director of South Professional Journalists. We appreciate the hard work, and we'll make a note of those emails and suggestions you gave, because certainly we'll share those on social media for people who did not catch it. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Aaron?
Okay, so I believe now we are going to be bringing in Trevor Tim from the Freedom of the Press Foundation, another group that was proud to stand with us in our statement condemning the attacks on press freedom and democracy. Trevor, thank you so much for your leadership.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting this important event.
Absolutely. So listen, we're talking about the legal protections that currently exist for journalists. Can you talk about some of those? And frankly, I mean, are there areas where they are falling short?
Yeah, unfortunately, the rights of journalists have been falling short, not just under the Trump administration, but in the last few administrations. You know, we run a website at Freedom of the Press Foundation called the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker, and we are trying to systematically document press freedom violations in the U.S. And in 2025, there was 30 journalists arrested around the United States doing their job, and there was hundreds who were assaulted on the job. You know, I think the nation has woken up a little bit after the arrest of Don Lemon and Georgia Fort, realizing how outrageous it is that the Trump administration is clearly setting out to undertake a vindictive prosecution, even though that we know that not one but two courts had already rejected the charges before Don was arrested last week. But what I think a lot of people don't know is that this is happening at the state and local level in a lot of different cases. And you know, you can look at Minnesota actually. Just in the past few weeks, you know, I'm looking at the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker right now. Just a few days ago, a video journalist was shoved and threatened with arrest by federal agents. Another reporter was grabbed and thrown down to the ground by a federal officer. Another was pepper sprayed. Another was clipped with tear gas canisters. Others were hit with rubber bullets and other quote unquote crowd control projectiles. And go on and on. There's been 19 incidents that have happened in the past 6 months in Minnesota. Many of them have happened just in the past 6 weeks.
I want to, can you just expound on that when you say 30, 35 or so journalists? They were doing their job. They were arrested for what reasons? Just for people who don't understand these arrests.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, 90% of the arrests that happened of reporters last year were reporters who were covering protests. So we actually don't count journalists in the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker if they were actually protesting, even though we believe that of course, is their First Amendment right to do so. We only track the journalists who are there covering protests or covering events that people are protesting. Oftentimes in these situations, police start mass arresting people. They are not respecting journalists' rights, even though they are often clearly labeled as press or have microphones or cameras in their hand. We've seen this going back to the George Floyd protests in 2020. Actually, there was over 100 journalists arrested during the George Floyd protests. And in the United States, covering a protest is probably one of the most dangerous things a reporter can do. Now, almost all of these arrests have been illegal. The police have almost always let them go. They will drop charges almost immediately or not file charges. Even if charges are brought, they are usually almost always dropped before a trial, because prosecutors end up finding out that, yes, the First Amendment does apply here and they are going to lose. But of course, there is this huge chilling effect on journalists that happens to. And of course, a huge chilling effect on journalists to just hear about it, like all the journalists that are hearing about this now. And so this case, the Don Lemon and Georgia Fort case is different because the reporters weren't arrested caught up in the moment. The Trump administration purposely has gone after them. They went to one judge who rejected the charges, then they went to an appeals court, and then they rejected the charges again. So clearly this is a vindictive move intent on chilling journalists and scaring journalists into not doing this in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Trevor, I'm just struck by what you said there. I mean, in the U.S., covering a protest is one of the most dangerous things a journalist can do. And listen, we know for Black journalists, we disproportionately are covering things like civil unrest, protests, immigration, right? Police violence. We are the ones that are disproportionately covering those. So to hear that means that we are disproportionately at risk for some of that danger. So can you just talk about what journalists should know right now about what their rights are when covering protests or state action?
Well, it really depends state to state, because thankfully there have been a lot of lawsuits that have been successful over the past few years. There's one going on in LA right now. There was one, a landmark settlement in Minnesota after the George Floyd protests. Police should be respecting press rights in protests and treating them differently than they are treating everybody else on the scene. Unfortunately, what we have seen is that is not often the case. And with ICE especially, they seem to have no concerns about running roughshod over reporters' rights. Reporters in almost all of these situations are clearly labeled with press vests. They're often standing back from the scene. They have cameras. It is obvious what they are doing. They have a right to film federal officials in public spaces. It's actually another issue that is important to bring up right now, which is the right to record. The idea that ever since cell phones have become ubiquitous in our society, court after court after court has ruled that everybody, whether you're a journalist or not, has the right to record government officials in public places. And what we have seen from all of the cell phone videos, whether it's the horrific murder of Alex Peretti or just the various videos that have been circulating online, ICE is essentially claiming that because cell phone videos could quote unquote dox their agents, that the Trump administration may consider it illegal. So we've seen many videos of people having their cell phones seized or knocked out of their hands, or even ICE agents saying that they're going to put people on a domestic terrorist list because they are merely exercising their First Amendment rights. So there are a lot of safety concerns and worries for journalists or just ordinary people who are exercising their rights. And while these rights have not gone away, they still exist. It is a dangerous situation that everybody potentially is putting themselves in.
All right, so I got to go ahead. Let me just go ahead and open up some trouble here. And this is the issue that we also have to confront. And I know, Aaron, you've been out there reporting, and we out there, we're covering stuff, and then someone next to us goes, "I'm a journalist," and you're like, "Are you really?"
Yeah.
So, Trevor, let's deal with that, because part of this issue is that, listen, this has really been the case for the last 20 years, and now with social media, it has just completely expanded. This notion of who's a journalist, who's media, who's a content creator. And so there are a lot of people who claim to be journalists. They're not. And so we've seen situations where folks, they want access to red carpets. They want to be in news conferences. And so how does your organization deal with that? Because these things also play out. Look, you've got a lot of right-wing conservatives going, "Well, oh my God, you liberal media people never said anything when this journalist, Nick Shirley, was reporting on daycares in Minneapolis," and it was kind of like, "Oh, he's a journalist." So just speak to that.
No, I mean, it's a great question, and it's a tough question to answer in this day and age, because the internet, for all of its flaws, maybe some people would consider this a flaw of it too, but it has democratized the ability of people to broadcast news, whether they are a full-time professional journalist or not. The way that I look at it is that everybody has the First Amendment rights to the press. It was not just given to professional journalists. The way that we answer the question when we're tracking whether somebody's a journalist or not for documenting purposes is, number one, does this person identify themselves as a journalist? Do they have a history of publishing information for public consumption? And were they engaged in news gathering at the time of the incident that we're talking about. Now, maybe this isn't a perfect definition, but the other thing that we have to keep in mind is we also don't want to take into account somebody's ideology, because there are, of course, many news organizations who claim to be objective, unbiased, but bias is often in the eye of the beholder. And so there are journalists who consider themselves very left-wing. There are some journalists that even consider themselves very right-wing. But when we look at it, like say they are covering a protest, we are looking at, are they identifying themselves as press? Are they observing, or are they actually participating? And a whole bunch of other factors to try to suss it out. And, you're right. There have been a handful of instances probably where somebody is trying to impersonate the press, but surprisingly, they are very few and far between. The journalists that we talk to on the ground, they may not be making a lot of money doing this, but they are out there day after day, and they're wearing press vests and trying to be very cognizant of the fact that they are not a part of anything that they're covering, but they're the ones observing. And so, so far it doesn't seem to matter for ICE agents or anybody in Minnesota. They are essentially taking the sledgehammer to anybody.
Trevor Tim, Executive Director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. We certainly appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Elise Munoz is president of the International Women's Media Foundation. Elise joins us right now on this discussion, Not on Our Watch, the attacks on press freedom. This is, of course, a partnership between the National Association of Black Journalists and the Black Star Network. Elise?
Hi, thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. I really appreciate the solidarity that all the press freedom groups are showing for journalists in Minnesota. We at the IWMF are primarily concerned about the safety of journalists on the ground. And shortly before ICE entered Minnesota, we held a 100 journalists safety session for journalists. So it really is our hope that journalists are preparing for their physical safety as well as for their psychological safety and, of course, their legal safety. And one of the things I want to stress is that it's so important for journalists to know that there are free resources out there for them to tap, including safety consultations, including legal support, including trauma support. So please, I know that Aaron is aware of all of this work, and at NABJ, I'm sure we'll be sharing links out to journalists on the ground in Minnesota who can access all of these resources.
Yeah, I mean, Elisa, I'm so excited to be, in solidarity with you and in partnership with the International Women's Media Foundation to be thinking about how we get these resources to members. So much of this, like you said, is free that you all are providing for journalist safety. And I just wonder if you can talk about, because you have been doing these safety trainings in the United States. These are the kinds of trainings, these are the kinds of things that your organization has been thinking about for journalists outside of this country, journalists that are covering conflict, that are covering war zones, frankly, in other countries. Can you just talk about what that looks like to now be thinking about having to do that here in this country, and what message you think that sends?
It's truly heartbreaking. We've been conducting hostile environments training for decades around the world. And in the past, I would say 5 years or so, about 85 to 90% of our safety work is in the United States. We are engaging in a nationwide safety training program. We're trying to train journalists to leave them behind in their communities. And the need is so astounding. And like I said, really, truly heartbreaking that we've had to turn inward and focus most of our work in the United States. Aaron, it's the first time that a person's immigration status has been included in our analysis of risk of a journalist. I mean, imagine where we've come.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to follow up on that, I have to ask about the impact to women journalists. How are women journalists uniquely impacted by these threats? And what support systems are the most urgent?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a real misogynistic approach to this administration. The threats, the harassment, the attacks online and in public are very gendered, and they are meant to send an additional message in addition to the media being perpetuated as a source of mis and disinformation. Women are belittled and shamed and set out as part of the problem. It's the first time we're hearing, this attack on wine moms, to name just a few. So I think that this falls into a general pattern of misogyny that is being pushed out by this administration, which is all part of a right wing and fascist playbook.
Yeah. And we've seen, a pattern of attacks on Black women journalists as well, in certainly this term, but in the previous Trump administration as well.
There's no question that women journalists of color bear the brunt of attacks against women by this administration. It's really shocking and astounding. But I do want to stress that there are steps that all journalists can take to make themselves safer, physically and online, and also emotionally. And I just encourage all of the brave journalists on the ground who are trying to save our democracy to take advantage of the resources that are out there. Reach out to all of the organizations that are part of this discussion and avail yourselves of these resources, because you need them to stay in the fight, and we need you to stay in the fight.
Well, Eliza, thank you so much. Just to let people know, if they are looking for those resources from IWMF, how can they find those resources with your organization?
They can come to our website and look for our resources. We also, please find us on Instagram and on Facebook. All of our resources are posted. We have many resources, particularly designed for the current situation in Minneapolis.
Thank you so much for your partnership, for your leadership. Elisa Liz Munoz with the International Women's Media Foundation. Thank you so much.
Such an honor to be here with you, Erin. Thank you for your work.
Absolutely. The honor is ours. So we want to now bring in somebody else to talk about really these global, some of the global perspective. Catherine Jacobson is with the Committee to Protect Journalists. Catherine, thank you for joining us. The Committee to Protect Journalists was also one of our partners in solidarity on the statement that NABJ put out in support of press freedom and democracy. Catherine, thank you for being here.
Thank you for bringing us together this evening. It's good to stand together. The Committee to Protect Journalists is an independent, nonpartisan organization that for more than 40 years has documented attacks on journalists and defended the right to report freely and safely around the world. Over the past decade, we've been ramping up our work in the US with both safety work, kind of like what Elise just mentioned with the IWMF. We also do safety trainings, that sort of thing, as well as advocacy in the US due to this kind of democratic backsliding that we've been observing and an increased demand. The arrests of Don Lemon and Georgia Fort mark a deeply troubling escalation in the treatment of press in the United States that we've been documenting at CPJ and trying to push back against. And these carry serious implications far beyond just the individual cases of Lemon and Fort. From CPJ's global research, we know exactly what happens when this line is crossed, when journalists are charged with felonies and when reporting is criminalized. The way the press is treated is frequently an indicator of a healthy democracy. In the United States, the free press is imperiled and democratic norms are eroding. The implications of this case are both international and domestic, though. U.S. actions shape global norms. When American authorities prosecute journalists for covering protests, it sends a message to governments everywhere that this behavior is acceptable and that free press is conditional, not fundamental. It also makes it much more difficult to advocate for imprisoned journalists overseas, right? If the U.S. is doing it, surely it creates a permission structure, for those authoritarian rulers overseas who would do the same. And then there's also a domestic reality that we cannot ignore. Journalists in the US, particularly independent reporters and journalists of color, as we've mentioned, have increasingly been arrested, detained, or assaulted while covering protests in recent years. And this shift is very dangerous away from the kind of democratic norms that we previously enjoyed to a certain extent, and freedom of the press that previously existed. We have moved away from that. And these distinctions really matter, right? Because it sets this tone for both how reporters are going to be treated and also how the public is going to be informed about what's going on in the country. If journalists are forced to weigh legal jeopardy every time they cover a protest, fewer stories will be told, fewer abuses will be documented, and the public will know less, not more, about what is happening in their own communities. At CPJ, we want to be unequivocal about what we're calling for. The charges against Don Lemon and Georgia Fort should be dropped immediately. Federal, state, and local authorities should reaffirm clearly and publicly that journalists have the right to cover protests without fear of arrest or prosecution. And the United States must recommit to international press freedom standards that it has long championed. And as a final note, I wanted to add that CPJ offers free safety training, we work with the IWMF and a group of other partners to help provide that. So please reach out via emergencies@cpj.org if you or your newsroom need help. And I just wanted to close with, the fact that press freedom is not about protecting journalists as a special class. It's about protecting the public's right to know and our access to accountability for the government. So thanks.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I understand that CPJ also has a hotline, right, for journalists that they can contact. Can you talk about the hotline and give them that information as well?
So emergencies@cpj.org is the general safety inbox that we have, and we triage from there. So we work with a series of partners, including the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. They have a great legal hotline if journalists need specific legal guidance. We also work with PEN America, Freedom of the Press Foundation, Trevor Tim was just on, as well as the IWMF to kind of help direct the needs the best. So,
yeah, I mean, listening to you, I wonder if you can share your thoughts on the current state of press freedom in the United States, but also how what we're seeing in the United States compares to press freedom threats globally. I mean, the United States sees itself as this leader on democracy and leader on press freedom. What does that reputation look like now?
The days of U.S. exceptionalism are over, right? I mean, it's fantastic at CPJ to be able to talk to my international colleagues. It's also quite frightening to hear what they have documented overseas, right? This kind of slow then fast authoritarian creep. It's like a frog in the pot of boiling water. You don't realize just how bad things are until it's perhaps too late. And so I think as Americans, we really need to look abroad, to look at the examples of what's gone on in Hungary and in Russia and in other countries where there is not media freedom, or where there's corporate media capture to the point where it's very difficult for independent reporters to function, and to think about what we want here, right? And also for journalists to be able to relate to the public as to why it's so important, right? Journalists are watchdogs, right, who inform the public about how their tax dollars are being spent. We care about the price of eggs, gas, why we invaded Venezuela, all of that. Journalists have that information and are able to, with authority and factually, explain what's going on. And without that accountability mechanism, I guess we're all just left to think that the government will spend our tax dollars correctly, right? And I think that's a really important message that we as the media community need to be conveying as well.
Hey, Catherine, I have an extensive DVD and Blu-ray collection of documentaries, historical movies regarding African Americans, but also movies on journalists. Mm-hmm. And so I was cataloging those last night, and I came across the movie Veronica Guerin, an Irish investigative journalist who was killed because of her work. And we rarely hear in the United States of a journalist being killed for their work. I think about Chauncey Bailey on the West Coast, and NABJ was very much, our members were very much covering that. But I don't think a lot of people understand that this work, being a journalist, is actually dangerous. There are journalists in different places that have been killed. There are journalists that have been working, who have been covering what took in wars, what took place in Gaza, the number of journalists being killed. And so people really need to understand that this is not just, a theoretical conversation we have here. In a lot of places, if you are a journalist, you have a bullseye on your back.
Exactly. And I would argue, quite frankly, that it's a failure of imagination is part of how we got here in the first place, right? Thinking that we're safe, that institutions will hold, and that this type of violence that we've seen in other locations, right, won't come home to us. And it will, right? Chauncey Bailey, yes, of course, is an example, and also quite important how the journalist community there came together to cover and report on his murder. And if memory serves, right, help figure out who actually killed him. Same thing with when a journalist was killed in Las Vegas in retaliation for his reporting, right, stabbed on his front lawn several years ago. So we have these kind of disparate cases, right? But I think we're able to intellectualize them as one-offs rather than, and frequently they are, right? I don't want to cause fear unnecessarily.
Right.
But I also think it's important for us to look at those examples and realize that, those examples overseas, there are domestic parallels sometimes. We just don't always want to look at them.
Catherine Jacobson, U.S., Canada, and Caribbean Program Coordinator for the Committee to Protect Journalists. We certainly appreciate the work that y'all do. And again, the phone number, if someone needs your assistance, is it a phone number and email that they call?
Email, emergencies@cpj.org.
Emergency or emergencies?
Emergency is plural. So.
Got it. Emergencies at
cpj.org.
cpj.org. All right. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Okay, so we are having a robust conversation about press freedom and democracy, what journalists can do to protect themselves in this rapidly changing climate where they are covering what is happening in this country under increasingly challenging conditions. And so next we want to bring into the conversation John Schluss, who is with the News Guild CWA. John, thank you so much also for joining, for answering the call, joining our statement of solidarity, and for showing up here tonight to talk about this very important issue. Oh, wait,
John, I think you're on mute, John.
Can you hear me now?
Now we got you. All
right. Well, I'm so happy to join with the National Association of Black Journalists in that message. We got to stand together in this moment. We're the largest union of journalists in North America. We represent about 27,000 workers. We represent journalists and media workers at more than 300 news organizations like the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, ProPublica, Politico. We represent a lot of folks in Minnesota at the Minnesota Star Tribune, the St. Paul Pioneer Press, and just many, many other news organizations. And thousands of journalists have been standing up, organizing, building a union. Folks like me who never knew that you could form a union, actually to save their publications, their newsrooms, for the public, and also fight for protections in their newsrooms, things like protective equipment and a lot more. So yeah, I'm happy to stand here and be with y'all tonight.
And we're happy to have you. Listen, I want to ask you though, I mean, you talk about all of these the journalists and all of these different media, these newsrooms that you are representing. So many of these newsrooms right now are dealing with layoffs, dealing with consolidations, dealing with weakened labor protections. How do these things make journalists more vulnerable to intimidation or retaliation?
It's a great point. And I'll point to Karen Attia at the Washington Post, the only Black columnist at the Washington Post who was fired illegally. We are arguing and fighting on her behalf. She's also fighting for herself. Her colleagues have been fighting with her because she posted on Blue Sky, I think pretty innocuous posts on Blue Sky. And it's really, I think, an intimidation by some of the owners like Jeff Bezos, which has business interests with the Trump administration, not aggressively speaking out and silencing people who are employed by the organization to actually deliver opinions. We saw just 3 weeks ago, Hannah Nathanson, who had her house raided by the FBI. And the FBI seized 2 of her laptops, 2 of her phones. She's a member of ours at the Washington Post. I mean, it's just an all-out assault across the board. And we're seeing more and more journalists need to fight for protective equipment, which is something you can do in your newsroom with your colleagues. And one of the things that we've been fighting for, you can fight for protections on not being doxxed. But you're right, the landscape has been bad. We've lost more than 45,000 journalist jobs in the United States in the last 15 years. That's a terrible stat. We shouldn't be losing this number of journalists. The economic headwinds are not great for a lot of news organizations, particularly in what used to be legacy newspaper companies that have been slow to transition to digital. We also have a lot of consolidation and the financialization of the news, where you've got hedge funds like Alden Global Capital and Chatham Asset Management. Now, Alden really owns a lot of Tribune companies. So think the Chicago Tribune, the South Florida Sun Sentinel, the Allentown Morning Call, and Chatham Asset Management owns McClatchy. Think of the Miami Herald or the Idaho Statesman. And Gannett itself has a lot of financial intertwines. And that alone is actually creating a stress to try and absorb and suck out as much of the financial gains that these companies can, rather than investing in journalism. So it's an attack in that framework before you even get to the fact that the Trump administration is directly attacking journalists.
Folks, if you actually see John's title, of course, it says that the News Guild CWA, that's Communication Workers of America. And so, John, I'll be sure to tell Claude Cummings that you on your job. I've already sent him a text. You were talking about, all those newsrooms covering. And I think back to when I worked at the Austin American Statesman, the Fort Worth Star Telegram, and heck, even KRLD Radio, CNN. I don't recall getting guidance, being able to go out. When you think about, gas masks, you think about how do you protect yourself. And that's the stuff that again, a lot of people don't realize. We're now at that point. When I cover protests, the likelihood of me getting hit with pepper spray or gas, a big attack, with tear gas was virtually non-existent. Hell, now you better grab a gas mask with your pen and pad or your camera, your phone when you're recording.
Yeah. And Google how to, what to do if you get tear gassed, in terms of what to do with your eyes and all the rest, figuring out where to even get a gas mask if your news organization is not providing that, or your institution, you're not attached to an institution that may be even giving you protective personal equipment.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. And it's sad because journalists shouldn't have to think about this. We just want to do our job, right? We have this wild itch to go out in the world, find those stories, and then bring them back to the rest of the public. And so we don't typically have to think about safety, but more and more we do, because we're seeing the way that federal agents are attacking. You had Trevor on earlier talking about the violent police response in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. And, we were really quick in that moment to join a lawsuit with a lot of freelance journalists to represent the journalists we have at the St. Paul Pioneer Press, at the Minnesota Star Tribune, to really work on not only settlements for this overreach, because journalists were shot with tear gas canisters to their heads, they were shot with rubber bullets, but to actually reform policing in the state of Minnesota. And we were successful in making sure that every single agency, whether it was the State Patrol, the Minneapolis City Police, Hennepin Sheriff, had to undergo different training to make sure that they knew that they could not violate the rights of journalists who are operating in the field. But you're absolutely right. And so one of the things that we're really pressing for in a lot of our newsrooms, and we represent now the journalists at the Austin American Statesman and the Fort Worth Star Telegram, is to make sure that employers are providing protective equipment. Because too often they're not, and they're not thinking about it. So if you're a journalist right now, you have the right to get with your colleagues and go and talk to your managers about making sure that you've got a plan in place and that you've got those protective equipment. The other thing that's really important, gas masks, shatterproof goggles, helmets, ballistic vests, and more, but also having the right to be able to refuse an unsafe request to go out and cover something. That's also something that you can contractually fight for. It's one of the things that we fight for at the bargaining table in all of our newsrooms, to make it so that if you do not feel safe going to that event, that you can actually safely refuse it and not be punished for going out there. And that's another thing, is making sure that you have basic job security, because we're seeing so many news organizations capitulate to the Trump administration right now and eliminate and fire journalists at will. And so that's one of the other things, is fight for job security in your contracts.
Yeah, these are all such good points and such good guidance. John, thank you so much for being with us and for answering the call and standing with us. We appreciate you.
Of course, solidarity. Thanks so much for leading this effort.
Absolutely. Okay, so we are going to move on forward with this conversation here. And I want to bring in next, I believe that we have Karen Rundlet from the Institute for Nonprofit News, another one of our partners who we're so glad to have with us tonight. Karen, are you there? Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for doing this. Roland, thanks for doing this. This is great.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, nonprofit newsrooms, and the role that nonprofit newsrooms can play in really preserving accountability journalism, especially in hostile environments.
Thank you. We have 500 newsrooms across the country that we support. We fundraise for them. We work to make sure that they have good audiences. The 19th is one of our members, and Center for Broadcast Journalism, where Georgia Fort was the president, is one of our members as well. So we're deeply concerned about this. We also work with many of the legal partners that you've already had conversations with: IWMF, CPJ, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, and we connect all our members to all their great resources. There are attorneys available. We offer delete me licenses so that you can scrub your private information from the web so that you're not doxxed. And I just want to say as well, reporters are walking the streets now. We're in touch with our members from Minneapolis, Sahan Journal, and on one arm there's a Sharpie with an immigration attorney and a name and a phone number on one arm, and the Sharpie on the other one is the First Amendment lawyer's name and a phone number. So that's kind of what's going on today at INN with INN members.
Yeah,
and Karen, there's somebody in the chat that said maybe journalists needs to have private police protection too. Police on police. Let's see how that works. We've seen that. I only see that on the network level in really large media entities. Mm-hmm. That ain't possible for nonprofit newsrooms.
No.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing is that we're trying to make sure that our members, some of them are small, some of them are larger. ProPublica is a member, that's a larger member. The 19th is a good sized newsroom as well, but there are smaller local newsrooms certainly. And we do make sure that they have attorneys to reach out to. And very important is media liability insurance. So that's something that they really have to do. But we do connect them to lawyers, pro bono lawyers, when they're in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, Karen, just listening to you describe this, I mean, I'm wondering your take on the state of press freedom in this country and the message that these arrests send to the folks, the kind of folks that are in INN, and what are you hearing from them about how they're thinking about this, how they navigate this moment, and how we do our job safely?
Sure. Well, you know, like I said, we're trying to make sure that they're physically safe, that they're digitally safe, because there are also a lot of attacks online. Elisa was on the town hall before talking about specifically for women and people of color, the horrible offensive attacks online. So the things that our members are really concerned about actually are very much around covering protests, immigration coverage, protecting their staff and their sources. There are a lot of creative workarounds that people have come up with to make sure people aren't alone going into situations like this, to make sure they have conversations about who they can call. You know, I mentioned, of course, having phone numbers, having phone numbers with you at all times to be able to reach someone. Also then, and making sure that their resources to manage and process the trauma of all of this.
Well, you're absolutely right. The trauma is a real part of this, and people have to deal with all of that. And so it is not easy, but many of these journalists are out there doing their job and doing it quite well. If folks need to read, if people want to join your organization, if they want questions, where should they go to get information?
INN.org, the Institute for Nonprofit News. We call ourselves INN. And I wanted to mention before, Roland, you were talking about credentials and the difference between a creator and a journalist and an influencer and who's who in these times. We make sure we do vet our members, and they do have to be producing original original reporting. It can't be somebody who just puts together lots of news releases on a website. They do have to be doing original reporting. They do have to be independent. And they do have to express that in certain ways and demonstrate that in certain ways. And they have to be transparent as well. So we actually do credential them. And, that's something that we can really stand by. We can say, you're an INN member, and we do provide credentials for them as well.
Karen, thank you so much for your insights here, and also for your leadership, and for telling us more about INN and how folks can get involved, and also just the important role that nonprofit newsrooms are also playing right now as we are covering the story of who and where we are as a country.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for leading this. We are with you 100%.
All right, we appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Mike Balsamo is the president of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. Mike joins us right now. And then just a note, folks, after Mike is going to be Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles. Mike, how you doing?
Okay, how are you?
Doing great, Mike. Again, what we are dealing with this recent arrest, Don Lemon, Georgia Fort, even before that, how press was being treated, how this administration has frankly made it clear that the press or the non-right-wing media entities they call their friends, that everybody else is the enemy. And we have never seen. Now we've had historically relationships between presidents and administrations and bad blood and feelings. They don't like this editorial or this particular reporter. But even if you count Richard Nixon, I don't think you've seen the level of vitriol that has been directed towards media. Donald Trump's campaign in 2016, also 2020, 2024, pulling credentials, keeping people in sort of like a pen. Just the treatment, again, deciding, upending press pools, who sits where in the White House press room as well. It's been a direct attack on the free press of America.
Yeah, it absolutely has, right? And first, thanks to NABJ for pulling this together very quickly, because when threats to press freedom escalate rapidly, our response collectively has to move just as fast. But as you say, a free and independent press isn't a partisan value; it's a democratic one, and it's not something journalists defend for ourselves. Right, we defend it for the public, and when journalists are arrested or detained or threatened for doing their jobs, the harm doesn't stop at the reporter. It shapes what the public sees, what questions get asked, what truths are allowed to reach the light of day. I think you make that point in the collapse of the White House press pool and the strain we're seeing every day on a free and independent press. So, whether it's the arrest of Don Lemon and Georgia Fort or the search of Hannah Nathanson's home, these moments are really a stark reminder of just how fragile press freedom protections can be. And the act itself sends a message, right? Not just to one journalist, but to many others who are watching that this could happen to you. And the role of a free press is being tested every single day. I think we've heard that quite a bit on this call, sometimes loudly, sometimes subtly, but always persistently. We've seen growing pressure on journalists in legal settings, in the field, online, and overseas. We've seen that trust strained, resources stretch, the pace of change accelerate faster than any of us would like. And it's not isolated, right? It's happening around the country. We've heard that again tonight here in cities, both big and small, at protests, at public meetings, in newsrooms themselves. And it's happening to everyone, to staff reporters, to freelancers, to independent journalists. And, as we know, reporters shouldn't have to calculate personal risk just to ask questions, to document events, or to bear witness. When reporters are silenced, it's the public that's kept in the dark. And that's why, to your point, a strong, free, and independent press is how the public learns what's being done in its name. It's how power is checked. It's how abuses are exposed. And it's how communities stay informed. And so, at the National Press Club Journalism Institute, we believe journalist safety and press freedom are inseparable from strong journalism. We have an integrated professional development and press freedom work with our Press Freedom Center, where we provide safety resources and emergency assistance program, real tangible support for journalists and their families when they face real risk, because defending journalism means defending the people who do it. That also means folks who are facing themselves immigration challenges or who are, covering protests in their own communities. And that's why solidarity like this matters, and why organizations like, NABJ and the National Press Club and our press freedom groups across the country need to speak early, clearly, and together. And it's why a town hall like this really matters, because when journalism chilled, it's the public that pays the price, and democracy is weaker for it.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, you're making such a good point, and it's so good to see you, my former colleague, my friend.
Likewise.
Just talk about. I mean, because you all were among the first to respond, to answer the call, to stand with us. The responsibility that you see journalism institutions have to speak collectively when press freedom is under attack. The importance of that strength in numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Silence in moments like this really creates uncertainty. And, when a collective press freedom group doesn't respond, it sends a message that pressure on journalists is acceptable. And so, I know there's always a hesitancy for journalists to make themselves the story, but advocacy for press freedom isn't political, it's protective, right? Defending journalists doesn't mean taking sides in a story, it means defending the right to report it. And the goal is not to influence coverage, but to ensure that coverage can happen at all. And it's why press freedom only survives if the public understands what's really at stake. It's really just so important that we reinforce this message that people don't need to agree with every story or agree with the journalists who are covering it, but they need to believe that journalists should be able to report freely, because an informed public is the strongest ally that we have for press freedom.
All right, Mike, question for you. Folks want to reach your institute. They need assistance. How do they do so?
Yeah, you can reach the National Press Club at press.org. It's really simple. Or the National Press Club Journalism Institute at pressclubinstitute.org. Like I said, we have an emergency assistance program, especially for foreign-based journalists. We have mental health support, immigration support, and we're here to provide those resources and to advocate for journalists across the country.
All right, then. Mike Balsamo, President, National Press Club Journalism Institute. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Folks, Karen Bass, former member of Congress from California, now the mayor of Los Angeles. She joins us right now. Mayor Karen Bass, how you doing? All right, let's pull the mayor into the show. Mayor Bass, your camera is not on. So we need to get your camera on, Mayor Bass. All right, so let's do this here. We're going to quickly, get the mayor and her camera on. I want to bring in Rashad Robinson. He's an advisor for the Committee for the First Amendment. Rashad joins us right now. Rashad, how you doing? Rashad, now you ain't, no, Rashad, you done television. Wait, no times. No, turn your microphone on. No, you on mute.
Coming in here and already getting in trouble.
Can't hear you. You must got that cricket Wi-Fi.
Oh, the versus Wi-Fi.
Like we can't hear him at all. Oh Lord.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Rashad, I mean, he's slowing all the momentum down.
There we go. Like you see, I have good lighting. I've got everything, but somehow I think the microphone transferred over to my phone. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're gonna have some words for you in the group chat later.
Oh Lord.
I deserve it. I'll take it.
Aaron, go ahead.
Well, listen, thank you, Rashad, for being with us, and also for all the work that you have been speaking out against press freedom. I mean, I saw you in action almost as soon as these arrests were announced. Saw you and Jane Fonda with the Committee on the First Amendment speaking out on these issues. What really does collective defense of the First Amendment look like beyond newsrooms? We're seeing such a groundswell of public support.
Yeah, I mean, authoritarianism only works if all the sectors of society comply. And so in so many ways, the Committee on the First Amendment, which Jane Fonda and a wide range of creatives and celebrities in Hollywood formed October 1st, was sort of relaunching something that Jane Fonda's father, Henry Fonda, and so many others were part of during the McCarthy era. But it is a sort of recognition when these type of attacks come to our freedoms, whether it's the right to protest, the right to a free press, the right to speech. We need all factions of society standing up. We need universities, we need business, we need Hollywood and media. We need all of those factors, all of those pillars of society to not comply. And so that is really the theory of change behind this work, is how do we get people in motion using their power and their platform and their relationships to be able to push back in really clear and strategic ways and help move more people into action to push back. But the work of holding those that enable, whether it is racism, whether it is homophobia, whether it is misogyny, whether it is all of the ways in which we are under attack, being able to hold the enablers, whether they be corporations, whether they be those in government accountable, has been at the heart of my work since I've been doing this work. And it's really great to be part of this effort right now and in this moment, hopefully getting more people to see what's at stake.
You know, Rashad, it's always interesting when I see these polls come out. They say journalists, people's impressions or opinions of journalists at an all-time low. They are just right above used car salesmen and lawyers. And this is what I always say. Okay, that's great. But here's what my experience has been. When folks get their ass in trouble, they often call a journalist before they call a lawyer.
Yeah.
It's amazing the number of people, whether they're in prison, whether they've been fired, whether they are going through trouble. My email is filled up. And my entire career, it's always been the case. When people need help, they often are calling media. So I never pay any attention to those stories because I always say, you know what? If your life is going good, okay, that's fine. But when you get in trouble, the two people you're going to call, journalists and lawyers.
Yeah. You know, it's always funny what we say we're for or against until we're like under attack. You know, I know people that you know, like don't want to have anything to do with a higher spirit, but when something goes down, they're like, you know, praying.
Lord, listen, I mean, churches, mosques, and synagogues were packed after 9/11.
Right. And so so you know, even the question around lawyers, when people need a lawyer, like, or when they're really have their backs against the wall, they go and they get a lawyer. And so I do think, you know, I think it's really important to put this in context that the polls may give us a snapshot where people are at, but they oftentimes don't give us their motivation. And they certainly don't tell us what people do when their backs up against the wall, and they don't tell us what people need in moments of crisis. And so that is the job of those that are writing the stories of our time. That's the job of activists like me to help make sense. So whether it's journalists or people who are trying to motivate people to action, we are the ones that are often trying to make sense of how the world looks and giving people, whether it's the information as journalists do, to be better citizens, to be better informed, whether it's or the work that I try to do every day, which is help people figure out how to take action in the most strategic ways. This is part of the work. And I think for people who are sort of watching what's happening at home and maybe think they're sort of a step removed from what they can do or how they can engage, one of the ways you should be thinking about all of this is that you probably have a job or maybe know someone that has a job that has a pension fund. Where is that pension fund being invested? You may have went to a university, has an endowment. Who's investing that endowment? Is Bill Ackman investing in, or is it being invested in places that are working against your power? Like, these are all opportunities every single day that we begin to take on those that are enabling this moment we are in. Because the inequality that's happening, the attacks on journalism that's happening, the attacks on our ability to even fight for a better future, right? Like, Roland, every single day, Emran, every single day, you help us make sense of so many different issues that are important to the community. But the issue of the First Amendment is not simply like about whether or not we care about this issue or that issue. It's about whether or not we even can fight for the things that we care about, whether we can even raise our voice, whether we can even push back in moments of crisis. And so that for folks who are like paying attention, we all have a role in being able to protect our ability to fight for a better future, to fight for the things that we care about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And why you're seeing this so much of this public support, because people are understanding this is not just about any one journalist, about any one protest. This is about the public's right to know. And so now that folks are increasingly engaged and paying attention to this issue, it is important that they have kind of the tools and an assignment, frankly, for them to know how they can support trusted messengers in their communities, and how they can be getting and committing to, getting accurate and honest information.
Yeah, I hope that people visit our Instagram at 1A Committee. I hope people will sign up or go to the website actually and just check out what we're doing. This is really a committee for those who are in the industry, in the Hollywood industry, who are making content, writing, producing on air, in television and movies. But what we're trying to do is organize this sector. But every single one of us lives in a sector in society. We are, we work in a business. We are part of a faith community. We have all sorts of ways in which we engage every single day. And we're going to need more of us to use the place in the space that we occupy to fight, to stand up, to use those spaces to say enough is enough. A line has been crossed. And that, I think, hopefully, if anything comes out of these deep attacks that are happening, it's a recognition that we have to build what's coming ahead. And, I oftentimes say there is no time machine that I want to get in, go back to, maybe for music or clothes. But for the most part, I don't want to get out of a time machine at a different time. I want us to go forward. And part of what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to fight for what the future looks like. And that means that we need to take some of these rights forward with us. And in order to do that, we're going to need all of us in the battle and in the effort. And so I'm so glad that you all are bringing us together in this conversation, this moment. And hopefully folks who are watching recognize that it's our responsibility to not just be passive observers, to not just sometimes retweet or amplify, but to do things in our own spaces and places, to call in the people in our lives, in our communities who are not speaking up, to hold the institutions that are accountable that we may give our money to or that we may be engaged with. All of this is part of the work at creating an environment where people recognize that things have changed and it's not enough to be silent. It's not enough to simply be silent, that we have to do more.
That's right. All right, Rashad Robinson. He ends with, "It's not enough to be silent," and we luckily got his microphone on.
I set you up.
Rashad Robinson for the Committee for the First Amendment. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, I think she now has her camera on. Let's welcome to the show former California Congresswoman and now Mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass. Mayor Bass, you there? There we go.
I'm here. How are you, Roland?
Great. Aaron Haynes, the president of the National Association of Black Journalists, joins me as well. So we're glad to have you on. You were one of the first political folks who came out swinging with the arrest of Don Lemon and Georgia Fort on Friday. Why was it important for you to weigh in the way you did?
Well, first of all, they arrested him in my city, and I'm not going to stand for that. I mean, it's just, just when you think you thought you've seen it all from this administration, you see something like this. So now, as far as I'm concerned, all of you are at risk. And the whole organization, the National Association of Black Journalists, and I know you're all looking at this, but one of the things that a number of us were talking about, at least in California, the Black elected officials, is how do we help you guys build a legal defense fund? Because, how is it that in Minnesota, which is, a state that is overwhelmingly white, and that protest, which to me didn't look too diverse, you get 2 Black journalists arrested. And in total, there were 4. And I just, again, just when you think you've seen it all, we see more. But I'll tell you, one of the things that happened here is something we need to think all about. We need to think about too, not necessarily journalists, but Keith Porter, the fact that he was killed by off-duty ICE agents, it made me realize that we probably have thousands of off-duty ICE agents, or agents of the Custom and Border Patrol. They're doing such a massive recruitment, and that massive recruitment, they're fast-tracking people through recruitment and training. So we're going to have all of these rogue individuals in our neighborhoods. We don't know what kind of training they've had. And you think about Minnesota, they have a police department of 600, but thousands of various agents there that pretty much overtake the local law enforcement. And so we don't know what kind of standards or training they're coming into. And so we need you guys reporting this story, in ways that are so important now, that even more important than the past. But we also got to make sure that you guys are protected. And I worry about you freelancers, that you don't have an institution that's going to pay your legal bills or help with you.
Well, to the point you just made there, I had the vice president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives on my show Friday, and he said one of the problems that they face is that ICE is coming in, or federal law enforcement is coming in. Case of Minneapolis, 3,000. That's far larger than the actual Minneapolis police force. And he said the problem is they're causing problems for us that we then have to clean up, and they also are concerned that they get mistreated by the very same people. So they actually mistreat the local police.
Look, when the National Guard was here, we have Latino members of the National Guard that when they were off duty and out of uniform, got pulled over by other National Guard. I mean, this stuff is just so out of control. And it's just so racially targeted. We have a police department here in Los Angeles that's almost 50% Latino. So now the police officers have to worry. Don't go home from work without your uniform on.
Yeah, that is definitely part of where we are right now. I'm listening to you, Mayor Bass, and I'm hearing you thinking about how local leaders should be thinking about how to balance public safety and press access, especially during protests or civic unrest. I mean, do you see, are you talking to even other mayors about what message to send to law enforcement about journalists' rights right now?
Well, yes. I mean, the mayors always talk with each other, always get together. And what's been happening in LA is happening in Los Angeles County. It often gets covered and people think everything is happening in the city. But our county has 88 cities in it. And many of the cities are majority Latino. And so you have a situation here where mayors and everybody else is vulnerable. It's really, the only word for it is just out of control. And we just don't know to what depths that, they're going to go. So yes, talking to our local law enforcement. But again, in some situations, the local law enforcement is overrun or preempted.
Well, it is certainly raised. These arrests have certainly raised the people's attention in terms of what is going on, not just with what ICE and federal law enforcement is doing in cities, but really the treatment of journalists. And that's the thing that we're most concerned about, especially independent journalists, to your point, Mayor, the folks who don't have major newsrooms, that don't have law firms, that don't have legal advisors, and they're sort of out there on their own. And a lot of the great work really that we're seeing, it's not coming from ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, Fox News, MS Now. It's coming from very small, localized journalists who are putting their necks on the line to get us what's actually happening in the streets.
Absolutely. And I think more and more as we watch broadcast media kind of fade out, we do have, that's why I worry about you guys, because you don't have institutions. For example, I have multiple federal investigations going on. They're investigating me for everything under the sun. But as mayor, I have a city attorney. I have legal backing. And, Don Lemon, he's going to have to deal with absorb these expenses on his own. So what do you guys do? I don't know if the National Association of Black Journalists actually has a legal defense fund, but I do think that we all have to begin to think about that now.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we're talking about, partnering with others as well. And so we've had those experts who've been on this town hall. Mayor Karen Bass, we surely appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Always good to see you, Roland.
Thank you very much. Folks, we're going to bring in a couple of folks right now. We're going to bring in Nick Valencia, founder of NVN. He's an independent journalist. Also bring in Vanessa Maria Graber, Senior Director for Journalism and Media Education. Glad to have Nick and Vanessa on. Nick, you've been out there on the ground. Give us a sense of what it's like for an independent journalist having to cover these stories with the type of pushback you're getting from federal law enforcement and ICE.
Yeah, I'm so grateful you guys are highlighting how important independent media is, because I was there on the scene after Alex Pretty had been killed within probably about 15, 20 minutes. And it took about well over an hour before I saw any of those big cameras show up. That was the power right there of independent media. It's going out there with my phone, and it's not having to wait for a photographer to choreograph this words and pictures dance. I'm literally taking people through the experience. And also, the institutions have been corrupted. The players within the institution are still doing their job, and there's some great journalists out there. But, I launch myself to these stories. We don't have to wait for the approval of an editor to think it's good enough to buy in. We just go and cover what we think people will care about. And right now, a lot of people, I've been consistently covering immigration, consistently covering social justice issues. And, what I've seen change is this sort of type of military tactics that are used out there to confront activists, and it's really elevated and escalated. And as I see it right now, there's sort of four pillars to all of this. There is, of course, the persecution of people of color. There is the killing, and some would say murders, of allies of those people of color. There's activists that are actively organizing and meeting what they call fascism at its front steps, going and traveling across the country. There are paid demonstrators, but not in the way that you might think, not by George Soros, but people who are older, a lot of military veterans who are not able-bodied, who are supporting these activists to go across the country. And the last part of it is what I experienced, and that's the infringement on press freedom. And, journalists, not just independent journalists, we're easy picking, but journalism writ large, the administration has a problem with us shining the light on what they're doing.
Yeah, Nick, listen, I'm hearing you starting to talk about, how really threats to press freedom show up differently, right? When you don't have the backing of a large institution. I'm wondering if there were other independent journalists on the ground, other folks in Minnesota that you heard from about what those arrests signal to them.
I think that's what the administration wants us talking about. They want us to feel scared and talking about this and sort of panicked. That's how I used to think words like fascism were too dramatic, right? I used to sort of cringe myself at people that brought that up. But, when you sort of look at the elements of what's happening, it's already happening. Just the idea that we have this paranoia as independent journalists and feel uncomfortable or feel that potentially there's going to be a knock on the door. I know I wasn't alone on the day that my friend got arrested, Don, and Georgia Ford and two others. And I wasn't the only one that was making plans if that happened to me. And that's what, that's when the fear wins. But there is, a lot of hope to be, a lot of hope to hold on to. There's things that are called Bivens lawsuits. It's a 1982, 1983 Supreme Court case that allows everyday citizens to sue federal agents for violating their constitutional rights and seek monetary damages. There are efforts being made on the ground to amplify messages of what's really happening. And I think the role of independent media is quintessential to that, to amplifying those messages of people on the ground that are really tired of, these disingenuous, not authentic, overly caked up makeup and hair gel, and really nice suits. People just want the truth. They want to know what's going on, and they want to know also, look, I'm not making any mistake. I'm standing up for the undocumented community, but I think what I'm doing is the most American thing possible because I'm standing and leaning into the First Amendment. I do what I do because I love this country, not because I hate it. I do it because I think journalism is a moral beacon and should be moral clarity, and that's what we need right now in this country.
Vanessa, I travel around the country. I do my show a lot, and I often will do a show from HBCUs, and I'll have students assist me from different universities. There's a young man, Jerome Richardson, who's now been arrested. He's a student who actually helped Don Lemon. This was the plea that he posted on social media, and I want to talk to you on the flip side about that because now you talk about chilling effect. Now, if you are a student who wants to be a journalist, this is what you may be facing.
Hi, my name is Jerome Richardson. I'm a 21-year-old college senior. I've maintained my silence up until now about my connection to the recent protests at City's Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is my hometown, simply because I'm focusing on finishing my degree and graduating in May. However, with an indictment looming, I fear for my safety and the threat of public doxing. Having overcome many obstacles to reach this point, I really hope to be able to complete this semester and graduate and earn my degree. On January 18th, I assisted Don Lemon during his visit to the Twin Cities by helping with logistics and connecting him with local contacts. Don was reporting on the situation on the ground during the occupation by DHS and ICE and Border Patrol agents. And at that time, I was proud to support his work in exposing the everyday injustices resulted from the federal government's agenda. As a consequence of this support, I'm now being targeted by Trump and the federal administration. I say this to say I'm incredibly proud of those who have already faced their indictment and detention. And I know this fight is far from over. Their courage has certainly inspired me. Yet this is the price of being unapologetic about humanity and love of Christ. I support the activists who felt compelled to highlight the hypocrisy of how Pastor David Easterwood could simultaneously be a pastor at the church and the local leader of ICE operations. What people are experiencing goes against human and civil rights, as well as the teachings of Jesus, who indeed flipped over tables. So while I've been an active youth leader since the murder of George Floyd, I'm speaking out now because I anticipate being in federal custody sometime in the coming days. I want to share my love and gratitude and ask that you all support through 3 actions. Pray for my safety and my peace of mind. Do not stop fighting against this oppressive system. And please support my legal defense fund as I am in dire need of you all's financial support and emotional support, as well as prayers.
So Vanessa, I'm not sure if he is a journalist or an activist. This is his GoFundMe page. It said a goal of 24,000. They've raised so far $16,465. Let's say if he was a journalism student, and like I said, I've actually had students travel with me in covering. I mean, this is something that people now have to think about with this action by this Trump Department of Justice.
Yeah, so Jerome is a student at Temple University, and I live here in Philadelphia. I'm a proud NAHJ Philly member. I've taught at Temple University. And unfortunately, this is a conversation that I've been having with students for a very long time. I've been covering protests, social movements for more than 20 years. I myself have been personally injured by police. I was trampled by police horses while covering illegal arrests during the Occupy movement. So with that personal experience, I feel compelled to make students understand the risk. We undergo risk assessment. You know, yes, we do know our rights. We know what rights we have to press freedom, but oftentimes those rights are not respected. And so we have to weigh the risks associated with going out there to cover social movements, to try to go behind police lines. And also, like, a lot of this was discussed during the height of the pandemic in 2020, when students at Temple, when I was teaching, were still expected to go out on assignment, and we lacked PPE, we lacked, testing kits. And so this is a continuation of that. I am currently, I work at Free Press, which is an organization created to give people a voice in the crucial decisions that shape our media. And, more than these threats to press freedom, we are horrified at the Trump administration's mass deportation campaign, which is creating the current climate of fear, state-sanctioned violence, and violation of our rights to due process and First Amendment rights. And as a Latina, I feel compelled to say our communities are being terrorized And that includes Black immigrants as well. By ICE enforcement, our friends and families are disappearing on a daily basis. And this is the reason why Americans are protesting in places like Minneapolis and Chicago and Georgia and Los Angeles and really all throughout the United States. This is why people are resisting and why journalists and media workers are documented. I mentor two students. One is a former Temple grad, and she's Colombian, and another one is a Puerto Rican student. And we've been covering the escalation of ICE enforcement throughout New Jersey. It's something that is not really visible right now in the media because it's happening in so many small towns. But that is why the governor is calling for people to document. And unfortunately, we, as many of us belong to small newsrooms or content creators or independent journalists, we really do have to come up with a safety plan. We have to work in teams. We have to make sure we have the hotline numbers. We have to have contingency plans for if our equipment is smashed, our phones are taken, if we're followed. Like this is real life for many of us. And not only as Latinos are we having to go out there and cover this, and especially those of us with U.S. citizenship or who are born here, but we're also having to work with the community in sorting through all of these ICE sightings and the flurry of disinformation and fear that goes along with that.
Yeah, I mean, Vanessa, just listening to you, I know we've got so many young people that are wanting to run to the story. They do want to cover this story because they know how important it is, and also some of them, may be living this story as well. Just want to ask you, I mean, as an educator, what we're preparing young journalists to walk into right now, and how journalism education has to respond differently in this climate.
So at the same time, we're dealing with a local news crisis, right? There's mass layoffs. And especially if you're a young student of color, it's really, really hard to break into this industry because of the rolling back of DEI, because of the racism and discrimination. And that's why you see so many students and young people create their own content, have this entrepreneurial sense where they're starting their own websites. And not everybody is able to work for a major news outlet, but they still want to be able to cover these stories. And for many of our communities, there are no news outlets. There are no Spanish language news outlets. So we're forced to use alternative forms of communication in order to get the message out. And when that happens, you lack the institutional support, these legal trainings and knowledge of resources. And so I think as older people, as veterans, as we should be mentoring people through NAHJ, NABJ. And I suspect that's what Don Lemon was trying to do with Jerome, is take him under this wing and show him the ropes. Unfortunately, they probably never imagined that they would be arrested and charged with these crimes that are completely unjust and should be dropped. And so I think we, just like in the pandemic, where we really had to talk to people about what could happen if you got coronavirus, right? We have to talk very seriously about the risks to your personal safety, injuries you can incur, and legal problems. And so we encourage students and young people to go out in teams, to work with people like myself who are part of news organizations, and to reach out and utilize all of these resources that people are sharing. But more than anything, we want people to get connected to their local legal collectives, because those are the people most likely on the ground who are going to help you get out of jail if something were to happen to you.
Nick, final comment from you. Your advice for the folks who have been covering this, or let's say ICE is coming their way. They plan to send folks to New Orleans and some other cities. What do you say to those independent journalists or mainstream journalists who are going to be out there covering these protests?
Trauma is real. It's not just the communities of color that are being impacted. It's everyone that, intersects with us on our everyday life, people that don't even know that they're interacting with an undocumented immigrant. All of that is interwoven. And so I also think the irony of journalism is that our success comes typically on someone's worst day. And so to be mindful of when you're out there covering these things, people get hurt, families are being separated, you may have some success as an individual, have a clip go viral, but at the end of the day, journalism is an active service. And that's why I think that we're having success at NVN, We're very mission oriented, and we're also able to apply to this new media world the ethics of legacy media. I think as independent journalists, the ones that are really getting a lot of traction, they're effective communicators. That's what it takes to be a new media journalist right now, to be an effective communicator, keep an audience engaged. The reality, though, if I'm being rigorously honest, is that there are a lot of independent journalists who are out there. I can't say a lot of, but I have seen independent journalists who are out there who identify as independent, identify as journalists, and they're throwing stuff in between their news gatherings. So that makes, people like me less safe. The last thing I'll say is that, you'll probably hear from Republicans, conservatives, others who denounce what's, or maybe not so much denounce what's happening now, like, where was this energy during Obama? And for me, I feel uniquely positioned to answer that because I was the reporter that early on broke stories about the Obama administration's mistreatment of unaccompanied child minors. And the difference here is, yes, Obama did deport, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. But ask yourself, did you ever see images like you see right now? Right now, cruelty is the point. Chaos is the point. It's part of the system. And that's what's significantly different. In any other country, we would be saying secret police target ethnic minority. That would be the headline. And instead, now we're living this. After this, I'm going to be on live in Ecuador because they see so many parallels between dictatorship and what they went through and what's happening now in America. Is that so crazy or what?
Yep.
What we're living now, Roland, I'm so glad that you guys are amplifying and using NABJ's platform to do this, because sooner or later, we struggle from a disease of individualism in this country, and sooner or later, you're going to be impacted by it, and we're all going to have to do our part. And I'm doing mine right now.
That's what we tell folks. Might be not my backyard, but it could be in your front yard real soon. Vanessa, and Nick, I certainly appreciate both of you joining us. Thank you so very much. Folks, we got about four guests left. Let me bring up Alex Garcia. He's the president of the National Press Photographers Association. Let me also bring up, please, Gabrielle Gonzalez. So bring up Gabrielle as well as Alex, please. All right, glad to see you, both of you. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you.
All right, Aaron, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Alex, we wanted you here. Obviously, thank you also for being in solidarity with us. NPPA was also one of the signatories on our solidarity statement, but really photographers who are documenting what is happening on the ground, these photojournalists who are on the scene, bearing witness, and creating part of that honest and accurate record. Talk about the unique threat to those journalists in trying to cover this moment, and what your members are telling you.
Yeah, so it's been my first week basically as a president, and it's been like a crazy one.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks. We had people reaching out to us. We had someone reaching out to us that he had been thrown to the ground and he had to go to the ER and had brain injury and doesn't know what to do. And so he reached out to us, and we're trying to provide him as much support as we can and send him places. For sure, like photojournalists, people carrying professional cameras, still and video, are often higher profile targets for some of these folks. And sometimes some of these federal agents they just have a bone to pick with somebody, right? And we've seen them targeting Black journalists more so than others. That's a real thing. I've seen that here in Chicago. And the problem is, like, for us, it's like you have to, if your photos aren't good enough, you're not close enough. That's the phrase that we use. And so unfortunately what happens is you're getting close and you're like looking at your camera and you don't have situational awareness. And sometimes, things can happen, and that's unfortunate. And that we were very deeply concerned about what's going on. And it's kind of crazy because we have we've been around for 80 years. We've represented thousands of visual journalists who've been around the world. And now we see some of those same kind of situations coming home, and it's very alarming.
Alex, as you were talking about that, I thought about someone, similar name was yours, Alex Wilson. He was a journalist with the Tri-State Defender Ethan McKaylee talks about him, the Chicago Defender, and of course Gene Robertson Hank talked about him in the race beat. He was covering the Arkansas that took place in Arkansas in 1957. White mob beat him, attacked him, suffered a serious brain injury, died 3 years later as a result of that. And what people don't realize is because Black journalists were being attacked by racist mobs, that's one of the reasons why you saw mainstream journalists covering the movement and not Black journalists, because they had to pull out for their safety. And so we talk about safety, and people just don't realize that this is a reality when you're out there. We think about war zones overseas, but we have to understand that, listen, when you're a photographer, you're up close and personal. You're literally there in the mix, the kind of images they get. And we see these photos and like, oh my God, that's a stunning image. But you're literally right next to the person when this is happening. And people literally are putting their lives on the line, and they have to deal with repercussions of tear gas and pepper spray, a smoke inhalation, but also getting pushed around, getting attacked.
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, and it's not getting any easier, right? And and we haven't really talked about this, but like, if you're going to go into the profession, right, and you're going to try to create generational wealth, right, are you going to go into journalism knowing everything that's happening? That's why it's been really challenging, for the past, for the years I've been in this profession, and I'm old enough to remember when NABJ was part of the Unity conferences with the NHJ, and we were all gathered together as a unified body, which is a beautiful moment in time. You guys had the best parties, by the way, like by far. I gotta tell you that. But
yeah, that's how we deal with PTSD. We better throw. That's how we deal with stress. So we better throw a real good party to be able to dance the craziness away.
Exactly right. But I mean, if we're going to support like new, journalists of color coming into the profession, I mean, we've got to find a way to support them. So for us, like one of the things that we do for our members is and by the way, it's a really good, we have, most of our members are independent journalists now. Like photographers have been hard hit by layoffs. And so most of us are independent, trying to find our way. And so one of the things that we do for members is we have a really big, we provide legal services basically for photographers. We're not licensed to practice law in every state, but when we're not, we can basically refer people to a network of lawyers around the country for referrals. We draft or join in letters addressing First Amendment and journalist issues. So we're pretty heavily into legal issues around this. The other thing I want to make mention for everybody, there's an organization called Crisis Ready Media, and they give free webinars. And we are going to be, the people who are part of that were former combat folks. So we are going to be involved in trying to partner with them to provide some more free webinars for people. They do in-person training. But that's a separate issue that I think most institutions might want to invest in. But most independent journalists are going to be a little bit more challenged to do that. So the other thing we have is we have a Press Pass Navigator on our site for members. So basically, if you are going into another city or state, as much as a Press Pass can help you, it's probably good to have. But sometimes it's not worth the paper it's printed on, depending upon who's looking at it. But those are just some of the things that we're trying to do for our members. And so if you want to go to our site, we have some free resources as well, nppa.org, and that can provide, we have a lot of articles that address some of the issues that we've talked about, some of the trauma, because when you're photographing trauma, you're experiencing it too.
Yes.
Yep.
It's a deep emotional thing, and it's not easy. Some of my colleagues who basically will just break down in the middle of a conversation recounting what happened, and you realize they need to get some help.
Yeah. Gabrielle, I want to come to you. You're with the American Society of Journalists and Authors, and I know that you've also got some resources for independent journalists that you want to talk about. Tell me about those.
Absolutely. So just Aaron and Roland, just want to thank you for bringing together this coalition. Also, Alex, your points on the risks that journalists take is so important. So just want to acknowledge the risk that all of us are taking every day and speaking out. So the American Society of Journalists and Authors We were proud to sign on. Again, to Vanessa was speaking earlier, in reference to Jerome being a Temple University student. ASJA has been speaking out on this, back in 2012, where there was an arrest of a Temple University student journalist just for photographing police officers engaged in a routine traffic stop. To today, we're issuing statements, on that, the recent invasion of the Washington Post reporter's home. So we're here to serve as a bulwark, against these chilling effects that many of you have mentioned tonight. Our statements routinely, include resources. Two that I want to mention tonight are our Writers Emergency Assistance Fund, or WEAF. We give grants to freelance writers. You can go to our website to get more information on that, asja.org. We also offer scholarships too. So again, speaking to that next generation of truth tellers, we want to build them up as well. So again, go to our website for more information on our upcoming scholarships. Also just want to emphasize that, we are a volunteer-led organization. So many of us, volunteer and prioritize service in other parts of our lives too. So, for me, for example, I am teaching journalism and media literacy to public high school students as well. So just there are things that you can do within your own communities to help with this, as far as like mentoring, sponsoring up and coming journalists, telling them about scholarships and other resources out there. And then just also, it's also important to remember, someone, Amity Pay from Liberation Ventures, which is an organization in the reparations space, recently reminded me that, in times of extreme harm like this, there's naturally going to follow a time of repair. So just keep that in mind.
On that particular point there, we talk about those resources. I said Vanessa Graber also said they're organizing a journalism safety training, and I just think, Gabrielle, what we're now seeing is, first of all, by doing this, and I've always said this here, you have to move as a collective. So if there's somebody who's already doing something, it doesn't make sense for NABJ to say, well, let's create our own. No, if you already got it, how can we tap into it? That's why I said earlier, it'd be great if there was a collective fund for legal assistance for independent journalists versus an individual. You can tap into it. And so this is where the sharing of information is just so important, to know what is out there to help folks who need help.
There's so much out there.
Yes, and more for us to do together. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Alex and Gabrielle, we appreciate both of you joining us. Thank you so very much. Your support of this National Town Hall is absolutely great. Thanks a lot.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
We're going to bring up folks. Let's see here. We got Nicole Carr, journalist, author, and professor. Joel Simon, director of Journalism Protection Initiative with the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at City University of New York. Joel probably has a two-sided business card with that long title. Glad to have both of y'all here. Aaron, take it away.
Yes, I mean, listen, Nicole, I want to come to you because, we've talked about kind of this long pattern of frankly, Black journalists having to cover democracy under duress. I mean, this is nothing new, and it is part of unfortunately, historically, we know that this to be the case for our journalists, and the unique challenges that that covering civil unrest and protests and the like poses specifically for us. Can you talk a little bit about that and just the role of Black journalists in keeping that honest and accurate record?
Yeah, Aaron, and excuse my voice, I've been battling something here. I'm glad to be with you all this evening. I insist at Morehouse College, at my classes, which include Clark Atlanta and Spelman students, I insist that we teach history of the Black press in what's been a newly expanded journalism major here, because it's instructive for us in so many ways, and it's interdisciplinary. Written a Substack post that's kind of taken on a new life after being up for a year, but it's really outlining the ways in which Hoover's FBI was targeting Black journalists. Many of those journalists who were serving in government, federal government roles and serving as foreign correspondents while they were in military service, and sending back these stories from Europe on the ANP, the Negro Press Wire, the
Black version of the Associated Press, and recognizing in real time that what they were seeing in concentration camps and some of the best coverage that we're seeing during the Holocaust is coming from Black journalists because they understand Jim Crow rule within the Third Reich, right? And so it's some of the reporting, a lot of it is more accurate than anything you ever read initially in the New York Times or the Washington Post and legacy media, all of that. We've worked under this threat before. And look, I think when we're talking about matters of neutrality, there's actually no room to be neutral in matters of human rights, right? I think we spent a lot of time, and I'm just going to bring it back to present years. What we're seeing in this assault today seems like it's coming out of nowhere. But if you're a journalist like I am, who was on the ground as the big lie was forming here in Georgia, a lot of us in local news were under private security. I was for 4 months. My children had an evacuation plan from this house. We were reporting locally and saying there are no ballots in suitcases under seats in Fulton County, Rudy Giuliani. For every Ruby Freeman you had 10 election workers and so many local journalists who were also facing threats. And we were encouraged not to talk about this. So silence doesn't do anyone any good. We don't want to look back on this as a history moment where we say, oh, we didn't narrate this properly in real time. And we should allow history to be instructive in this time. So this stuff didn't come out of nowhere. And I always maintain that if we as a collective, we're talking about a lot of collectivism here on this call tonight. If we had stood up for the April Ryans, the Wei Zhejiangs, the Jim Acostas as a collective, and I'm talking about from the White House press pool on down, and not accepted that from this man and this administration, his administration 10 years ago, as this narrative of fake news was building, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are now. We have largely fed this beast. And we've been in dangerous times for a long time. So I'd encourage anyone who thinks that being silent and they think that neutrality on human rights issues are going to save them,
right,
to think again.
Hey, Joel, let me ask you this here.
Sure.
You're having to teach, I would believe, a lot different today than you did 20, 30 years ago. And not just because of technology, but literally the level of threats that journalists now face is just completely different than it ever has been in this industry. Speak to that, please.
Yeah, well, I should tell you a little bit about my background. I wasn't teaching 20, 30 years ago. I was a journalist myself and worked in Latin America. And then I ran the Committee to Protect Journalists for a long time. And my job was to defend the rights of journalists working in the most violent and repressive places around the world. That was what I did. And I really never thought that we'd be grappling with these kinds of issues in the US, or maybe I thought it was possible, but it was something I never really confronted. And so when after 25 years of running the Committee to Protect Journalists, I looked at what was happening in the United States, and I spent a year before I joined the Newmark School, where I teach now, working on a major report about the history of journalists covering protests and demonstrations in the United States and the lack of legal protections. And this report is called Covering Democracy. And I actually anticipated, I said, the laws that protect the rights of journalists covering protests and mobilizations going back to the civil rights era are incredibly weak. We don't have real protections. And every time there are mass protests and demonstrations, there's a crackdown on the press freedom and the rights of journalists, and this has been something that has been present throughout our history. So when I got to the Newmark School and I started teaching, I basically brought into the curriculum the notion that in order to practice journalism in the United States, we needed to train students on the kinds of techniques and strategies that journalists working in more authoritarian and repressive societies around the world have had to grapple with for many years. How to make a basic safety plan, how to understand and use protective equipment when you're out reporting, particularly on protests, to really understand your rights, but also understand that often your rights are not going to be respected. You're going to have to, if you assert your rights in the context of, say, a police action, you may not be in a position where you can actually protect your own the constitutional rights that you have on paper, and also to navigate this online space where harassment is a constant reality, particularly for female identifying journalists and journalists of color. Everyone, who's tuning in tonight is going to know this. This is not going to be news for anybody. But young journalists who are entering the profession, in order to be successful, we wish this were not the reality, but this is the reality in which the next generation of journalists will have to work. And in order to be successful, they need to master the kinds of skills that were once the domain of journalists working in historically repressive and violent societies around the world.
Great advice there.
Yeah, absolutely great advice. And Joel, I'm just listening to you and what you have learned from all the hats that you have worn and continue to wear. I mean, the warning signs you see when journalists are arrested or intimidated in democracies. And can you also just speak to how quickly these patterns can escalate? Because I don't know if people are really aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that when I look around the world in my CPJ role, this is, again, something that many people have observed. The first line of attack is against journalists and the media. So if you see journalists coming under attack, you know that there's a broader crackdown that's coming. This was true, in Russia. It was true in Venezuela. It was true in Hungary. It was true in Poland. It doesn't matter the nature of the society. The first line of attack is usually against the press. And there's a reason for that, is because the presence of journalists, is kind of and journalists. I should note that I am not talking about, the traditional notion of journalism, the kind of hierarchical legacy organizations. Journalism is practiced increasingly in a variety of different ways by different kinds of people, many of whom are operating independently. We see that in this country. But when there's a crackdown on that kind of ability to document and disseminate what's happening, that and that ability is compromised, that opens the door for broader repressive action. And that's actually what we're seeing right now. Of course, this is obvious. And what's really interesting, I just, Roland and I want to make one point that I think is important in a historical context. Journalists have always said throughout history that, we need the public to stand up for our rights because we are your eyes and ears. And this was, certainly the case in the civil rights movement. John Lewis famously said, that without the press, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings. But of course, it's reversed today, in the sense that so many people are out there practicing journalism informally, and their ability to document the activities of law enforcement is being utilized by traditional media to understand and contextualize these murders that are happening and these abuses. So we are all in this together. There's, journalists have traditionally talked about press freedom, but we really need to expand our understanding of what's under threat. It's the broad expressive activity protected by the First Amendment. Journalists and people who are out there with cell phones documenting what's happening, we are all in this together. All our rights are under attack.
Nicole, your final comment. I know you don't have much of a voice, but final comment.
No, I will piggyback off of Joel. All I want to say is Darnella Frazier.
Right.
If it weren't for that 17-year-old young lady who went on to earn this Pulitzer citation, if we had been relying on Minneapolis police and the press release, the story of George Floyd would be unknown. So absolutely, a threat to one of us documenting, bearing witness is a threat to everyone. So
indeed, folks, Nicole Carr and Joel Simon, I appreciate both of you joining us on this critically important National Town Hall. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Had lots of folks who have commented tonight. There were some people wanted to join us, but because schedule couldn't get on. So we appreciate everybody who came on to offer their professional insight, expertise on this critically important topic. Aaron Haynes, your final comments.
Yeah, I mean, Roland, what a robust and important and urgent conversation we have had. And as we close tonight, thank you so much to all of you for hanging in there with us and tuning in. I want to be clear about what this moment requires, because what we've heard across this conversation is that press freedom does not defend itself. It survives because people choose to protect it, not just in principle, but in practice. And so too often we know that Black journalists are asked to bear the greatest risk with the fewest resources. So I want to talk about just what support looks like right now. First, stand with Black journalists publicly. Follow our work, share it responsibly, push back when our credibility is questioned or when our presence is challenged. Visibility is protection. I think you heard so many people saying that tonight. Second, invest in the institutions that exist to protect us. NABJ was created for moments like this 51 years ago to advocate, to intervene, and to ensure that Black journalists are not facing these threats alone. So if you're able, support NABJ's work, support Black-led newsrooms like this one, and support organizations providing the legal, safety, and professional resources. And third, speak up where you have an influence. We heard people calling for that tonight. So if you lead a newsroom, if you lead a classroom, a foundation, a community organization, ask what policies, protections, partnerships are in place when journalists are targeted, and what gaps still exist to be addressed. And finally, refuse silence. That is what this message is sending. The chilling effect. When you can silence Black journalists, who else can be silenced in our society, in our democracy? History shows us when attacks go on the press go unanswered, they can spread. So accountability really depends on witnesses, and witnesses need protection. So NABJ is going to continue to do this work, advocating for our members, naming patterns of abuse, and defending the right to report freely and safely. But we can't do it alone. A free press is not a privilege. It is a public good. And protecting it is a shared responsibility because this is about the public's right to know. So we want to say thank you again to the Black Star Network for partnering with us on this broadcast. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight and for standing with Black journalists and with democracy.
Folks, my final comments. In our Black Star Network studios in DC, there is this portrait right here. And you see James Baldwin to the right, with Harry Belafonte in the middle. To the far left there is Ida B. Wells Barnett. And what is on there is her famous quote. That is, the way to right wrongs is to shine the light of truth upon them. Those of us who know that's the case. Also, Freedom's Journal, nation's first Black newspaper, said March 16, 1827, in their lead editorial, "We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us." That has long been the mantra of the Black press in this country. And the reality is the Black press knows full well about what happens when the government comes after you. I've said this numerous times before. Ethan McCaley did an amazing job with his book called The Defender, how the legendary Black newspaper changed America. In this book, he details how Black newspapers were writing about during World War II, writing about racism that Black troops were facing. Our federal government literally threatened Black newspapers with being arrested for treason, saying that their writings were causing dissension upon the ranks. And they only wanted them to focus on the good of the war. They said, wait a minute, but Black troops are getting caught. They're catching hell when it comes to racism. That's where the Double V campaign came from. Pittsburgh Courier led it. They called Victory at Home, Victory Abroad, fighting fascism. The reality is, and one of our Nick said it. He often heard people talk about the word fascism. The reality is we are seeing an authoritarian regime target journalists. We're seeing the attacks on journalists, the attacks on media institutions. And the reality is this here. Katharine Graham no longer runs the Washington Post. You don't have that kind of leadership there. You don't have the leadership of the Bingham family in Kentucky, the Chandler family in Los Angeles. We can go on and on and on, where you had folks who actually believed in the First Amendment, who believe in the freedom of the press. What we now have are corporate individuals who often on the mainstream level are more concerned about their stock prices, their private equity investments, as opposed to the work of journalists. Journalists are now having to do the work, do the heavy lifting, And then you look back and realize that you have bosses who don't have your back. For independent journalists, it is an even tougher road. Thin margins already there, barely being able to pay bills, but folk who are committed to doing the work of journalism. They want to do the work that the Ida B. Wells Barnett, and of course, Martin Delaney, and Frederick Douglass, and Robert Abbott, and of course, Alice Dunnigan, Ethel Payne, Chuck Stone, Lerone Bennett, Simeon Booker. We can go on and on and on. All of these folks, they understood the power of media. And if there's any time where we need a free press, it is right now. It is right now when the Wall Street Journal writes a story about Donald Trump's family getting $500 million from a sheik doing business with them. It is even more important when you look at insurance companies, when you look at petrochemical companies and Cancer Alley in Louisiana, when you look at what's happening in Mississippi, when you look at environmental issues, when you look at all of these health issues, all of these things matter because media, like Ida B. Wells Barnett said, shines a light upon darkness. See, folk don't mind doing the dirty stuff in the dark. When a light hits them, things change. And that's exactly what media does. There is no greater time than we need a free press than now. Transparency? Absolutely. Truth? Even more absolute. And this is where the public needs to stand with us and support us. We've shown you GoFundMe pages. We've shown you organizations, nonprofits that raise money for legal defense funds, for training, for security, all of those different things. They are all needed because trust me, if this country does not have a free press, then we are not like everyone else. And when people say, oh, our soldiers, they fought for this. Remember, our soldiers, when we have wars, they didn't fight for the Second Amendment alone, or the third or the fourth. There's a reason the first was the first. We appreciate NABJ partnering with us here at the Black Star Network. Folks, I'll see y'all tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. Please don't forget, follow NABJ at NABJ Official on Instagram. Follow NABJ on Twitter. Please go to nabj.org. We also, of course, have a campaign where our goal is to raise $10 million for our fund to create our endowment fund for NABJ. We created a golden circle as well. We have different levels where people can give. So go to nabj.org to be able to see what that is. We've got to have a strong organization. We are the world's largest minority media organization. We represent Black journalists all across the world. And so please, your support of the work that we do is absolutely critical. And so whether you could give $1 or $1 million, it does not matter. Every single dollar counts when it comes to training the next generation of Black journalists. Let me thank my Black Star Network staff for having put this together. Appreciate everybody for all the work that they did, folks. Thanks a bunch. I will see y'all tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern on Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network.